be the Speaker of this House, and I were in touch with your predecessor at this time.
Mickey Levy?
No.
Ah, two predecessors.
Yes, two times before. Yeah, we exchanged visits in those days, and it was very good cooperation.
And I would love you to come back to the Knesset.
Well, I hope so.
Sure.
Mr. Speaker, I do hope
I will leave you with my details.
It's not that complicated, you know.
I will leave you with my
details.
details.
Dialogue, as you know, Mr. Ambassador.
Sure. You're more than welcome.
Before you start, nice to meet you. It's Carlo Borghi from, I'm the member of my party that is the League in the Intelligence Committee.
Sure.
So,
good to meet you. Thank you.
Sometimes I have a meeting with the ambassador to share view for military intelligence or something like this.
I will try to do my best giving you some other view.
To learn from you.
Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Okay.
So on our agenda, we have the hearing of the Speaker of the Knesset, Amir Ohana. This is a hearing before the joint session of the committees of the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate. And I would like to thank the Speaker and for his willingness to be with us. I'd also like to greet the Ambassador of Israel, His Excellency Alombar, and the other members of the Israeli delegation. As was said by the Italian Prime Minister when she met Prime Minister Netanyahu on the 10th of March, Israel for Italy is a friendly nation, an essential partner in the Middle East and on the global stage. Many similar statements have been made yesterday during the institutional meetings of Speaker Ohana. Our government is resolutely determined to act against anti-Semitism through the work of coordinator against anti-Semitic events and also the actions to keep the memory of the Holocaust. Having said this, I wish to give the floor to Speaker Ohana.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I appreciate your invitation. Thank you so much, Mr. President. I appreciate very much your invitation. And it is always a privilege and an honor to speak to friends of Israel. And you are such a good friend. I will very briefly, with your permission, introduce myself, then the history of the Israeli-Arab conflict, and it's going to be very briefly because I can talk hours and hours about it. And then I will open the floor for your questions, and hopefully we will get some answers too. I will do my best anyway. And do feel free at that section to ask about anything that you may find interesting, any issue, any subject, and not define yourself to one issue. So, I think this meeting only demonstrates the very special relationships between Italy and Israel. They have always been good, but I think I can honestly say that today, in the recent times, they are better than ever before. And for that reason, I have visited both the Camera yesterday and the Senate and had very good meetings with the presidents of the Camera and Senate, inviting them to come to the Knesset, to Israel. And I hope that we will see you on these delegations as well. I told the president here that we will do our best to connect the both committees, the respective committees in the houses, to share information, knowledge, and even exchange delegations. So, my name is Amir Ohana. I was born 47 years ago in the southern city of Beersheba in Israel. When I turned 18, I joined the military like most of us do in Israel, and then spent a total of 12 years in the defense forces of Israel, both in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, the military, and the Shin Bet, the Israeli Security Agency. That was during the second Intifada, probably the roughest times regarding counterterrorism, the early 2000s, in which we have had buses exploding, coffee shops, shopping malls, restaurants, almost on a daily basis. Each of those events caused many casualties, and of course, we lost many, many lives through that times. I joined the Knesset at the end of 2015, just more than 7 years ago. I was a member of quite a few committees, but one of the most important ones was the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, which I served for 4 years until becoming Minister of Justice of the State of Israel. That's a cabinet minister, and later on Minister of Homeland Security. For the past year and a half, we spent some time in the opposition, as you may know, because I'm with Likud party, headed by Benjamin Netanyahu. And for the past, what is it now, 5 months, we are back in government, and I became Speaker of the Knesset. Now, talking about the Israeli-Arab conflict, the first thing to understand is that it did not begin at 1967. Now, why is it so important? Because many people and some friends of ours consider the fact that if only we will withdraw to the 1967 borders, we can have peace. But did we have peace before we had the 1967 borders? The fact of the matter is that we didn't. Actually, since the establishment of Israel back at 1948, and even prior to 1948, we didn't have one day of peace with our entire neighbors. Actually, in just one weekend of August 1929, 133 Jews were slaughtered, butchered, killed in various horrific ways in Hebron, Tzfat, and other locations throughout Israel, and many hundreds were severely wounded. And one can ask themselves, what was it in 1929 that caused that emergence of violence? Was it the establishment of Israel that only came later, or was it the occupation or the liberation of Judea and Samaria at 1967 that only came decades later? Of course not. What was it? I believe it was, and unfortunately it still is, the unwillingness of our neighbors to accept the existence of a Jewish state in any borders. Now, when I say our neighbors, I don't mean all of them. I don't even mean the majority. What I do mean is, unfortunately, the influential majority. And this is what counts. But gladly, as I will show you in this conversation, this is changing. Now, initially we had to deal with two very powerful bodies regarding our neighbors. One is, of course, Hamas organization, an evil terror organization totally devoted to the destruction of the State of Israel and the killing of as many Jews as possible. Sorry, as even my colleagues from the other side of the political aisle, my colleagues from the left, would agree that Hamas is a terror organization. In its covenant, they yearn, I'm talking about Section 7 to Hamas covenant, they yearn to the day where the rocks and the trees, al-shajjar wal-hajjar in Arabic, would shout, "Ho Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, come and slaughter him." A Jew, mind you, not an Israeli. And they don't only say it and write it, they demonstrate it by deeds. Some of the most horrific terror attacks that we have known throughout the years comes from Hamas. But on that, as I said, even my colleagues from the left would agree. But they would say we do have the others that we can talk to. We do have the partners, meaning the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, sorry, that was established back at 1964. Now this is quite interesting because, as you know, we have liberated / occupied, depend on your point of view, the lands of Judea and Samaria, or what they refer to as the West Bank, at 1967, June 1967. So what was it that they wanted to liberate Palestine from at 1964? Or rather, should we ask, what is Palestine? Is it really the settlements, Judea, Samaria, Male Shomron, Otniel, as they claim? Or is it really Yafo and Akko, and Haifa and Tzfat, and everything that we consider as the state of Israel? Now, even my colleagues from the left would agree on that. They would say that's true, but that was back at 1964. This is 2023. They are willing to compromise. They moved ahead. Why won't you? That's a valid question, but it is also a valid question to ask, have they? Because even today, 2023, in all, or at least most, pro-Palestinian demonstration, you would still hear the same old slogan saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Now, you guys know the map. This is the river, this is the sea, this is the state of Israel. So where does it put us? Taking swimming lessons, right? This is the only option. And it is not only a slogan that is being said in demonstrations. If you listen to high-rank officials of the PLO, again, I'm not talking about Hamas, they will say, and I'm quoting Abbas Zaki, a very high-rank official of the PLO, giving an interview, of course in Arabic, not in English, not in Hebrew, saying this, and this is a quote, you can find it on YouTube. Don't say we want to destroy Israel. Don't say it. The world doesn't want to hear it. We are talking about the 1967 borders. Now the Rais knows, the Rais is the president of the PA, Mahmoud Abbas, and we all know that once they will withdraw to the 1967 borders, we can take them. But don't say it. It is not proper diplomacy. And throughout the years, even when we had all the warnings that I just provided, we have tried to achieve peace. We had governments that went a very, very long way towards the positions of our neighbors, taking tremendous risks. I would say the first one was, of course, at 1993 with the Oslo Accords, in which the Israeli government accepted that since we want peace and they want to rule themselves, let them have it. We basically said, guys, you want to rule yourselves, go ahead. We brought Yasser Arafat, the leader of the PLO, that was haunted in Tunisia and wherever he was, not only by Israeli intelligence, but also by other intelligence forces. And we brought him with thousands of his colleagues, and we told them, rule yourselves. Form your own government, form your own parliament, form your own police system, judicial system, education system. We just want to have peace. And we did it. But did we get peace? What we got is terror escalated to levels we have never seen before. Now, not many Israelis remember that, but prior to 1993, we didn't have suicide bombers. We had terror, yes, I was talking about it. But the first one was at 1993. By now, we can, of course, count them by the hundreds, and unfortunately, the victims too. And you might expect that we have learned the lesson. But then came 2005, in which the Prime Minister, the late Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, said we have to end the occupation on Gaza. That's a quote. And so we have. We took the soldiers out of Gaza. We took the camps out of Gaza. We took Jews living there for 3 generations and forcefully took them out of their houses. We even took the dead out of their graves because we knew what would happen if we leave them there. Now, some expected that Gaza will become the Singapore of the Middle East. They have a beautiful strip by the shore. They will build hotels, invest in education, healthcare, everything that a normal people who wants to live does. Others were more skeptical. They said, well, maybe not the Singapore of the Middle East, but at least from that region, we will face no more violence, because what's the case? We are no longer there. What did we get instead? We got tunnels underneath our villages that would go to kidnap and kill as many Jews as possible. We got missiles that would go further and further to kill more and more Israelis, which is exactly the challenge that we are facing today. In just a few days, I'm talking about the last few days, we have had more than 100 missiles fired from Gaza Strip towards Israeli civilians. This is something I don't think there is any country that could tolerate, that could bear. And this is the meaning of the operation that we took tonight. This time it was not Hamas, although Hamas does control the Gaza Strip, but it was Islamic Jihad, fully funded by Iran. And speaking about Iran, who is, of course, the major threat that my country experienced, but I don't think it is only my country, I think it is the free world. Iran does not only fund terror, and I'm talking about Islamic Jihad, I'm talking about its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, I'm talking about the Shiite militias in Syria, but also its regime, and I do want to differ between the Iranian people, which we had great relations with before 1979, and the Ayatollah regime. So they are 2 different entities for me, at least. The Ayatollah regime openly calls to eliminate and to destroy the state of Israel. And now that they say it, they are doing the best efforts to obtain nuclear weapons that will enable them to do so. So this is, as you can understand, an existential threat for my country. But as I said before, they see us as the small Satan. They see America as the bigger Satan. But for me, it is the free world, the free democratic world that they are after. And we only represent that world in the region, in the Middle East. So this is why they are targeting us. I want to finish by an optimistic view, because I just gave you all the pessimistic views. And I am by nature an optimistic person, but trying to stay realistic. I do believe that peace is achievable. I'm willing to say more than that. I believe peace is inevitable, but only based on 2 major pillars. One is education, the second, economy. Now, what do I mean when I say that? When I say education, and Italy, as a good friend of ours, can surely relate and understand that the incitement to terror has to stop. The payings of salaries and bonuses, even to the murderers of 2-month-old Hadass Fogel in her bed, by the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, has to stop. The glorification of murderers and naming streets and buildings after them, like the government building in Ramallah, not a small alley, just the government building in the capital city of the Palestinian Authority, is named after Yahya Ayash, aka the engineer al-Muhandis, who is responsible for the killing of more than 100 women, children, and innocent men just because they are Jews. And this has to stop if we are serious about achieving peace. When I say economy, what do I mean? And I urge you to take a look at the industrial zone of Balkan. Balkan is located on Judea and Samaria, what they would refer to as the West Bank. And what you would see there with your own eyes, and I have seen it, is thousands of Jews and Arabs working together on a daily basis, sharing lunch, sharing family pictures, congratulating each other for a newborn in the family, living together rather than killing each other. And mind you that some of those who call themselves peace activists wants to boycott exactly that. How absurd does it get? This is coexistence in the making. This is peace in the making. This is exactly what we should have more. I'm not optimistic enough to think that it will take years. The truth is, it will probably take generations. I may not see it in my lifetime, although there is nothing that I would like more than that. But if I want my children to get to see it in their lifetime, we should start work on it now. And it is, as I said, both possible and I believe inevitable. Thank you, Mr. President.
Grazie davvero.
Thank you very much. So, people registered to speak. First of all, Formentini. Thank you, President, and I'll try to be very brief and concise. I wish to thank the Speaker of the Knesset. I thank him heartfeltly, and I believe that every day we have to ensure that there's more Israel in Italy and more Italy in Israel. That should be our goal. We are democracies. You spoke often of the free world, and what we are most proud of today was the long process to achieve democracy, and the West must be all united in democracy, and the deep friendship between Israel and Italy can truly be a basis for the rebirth of the West. We're convinced of this. Israel obviously is under attack. There's a constant terrorist threat. I, many times in the previous parliament, had the honor of chairing the Italy-Israel protocol, and we often stood by Israel, speaking out against what perhaps is the most, the vilest form of anti-Semitism, which is hatred for Israel. This, unfortunately, is increasing, whereas the traditional forms of anti-Semitism are well known, and we know how to combat them. That is more difficult to combat, but we always have to speak out very clearly and loudly. The friendship between Italy and Israel can also be a major economic opportunity, because Israel is called the startup nation, and Italy is the second manufacturing country in Europe. So there are many opportunities. We can also learn a great deal from Israel in a time of climate change and water scarcity in our country, in Italy. the exchange of technologies can certainly be of help for our agriculture and also for our industrial activity. I wish to thank you again in the hope that truly we will be able to establish peace, but that we can establish peace without denying roots, in particular the common Judaic Christian roots, which Europe has not recognized, but which we believe in deeply. Thank you. Orsini. Thank you. Many thanks, President. It's a great honor for me, and I believe for all of us, to have in our Parliament the Speaker of the Knesset, because the Parliament you're the Speaker of, I think, is one of the greatest symbols of Israel, not only beautiful because of the works of art by Chagall, but also beautiful because it is the only free parliament in a very complex geographical area, in a geographical area where freedom is represented by the institutional and political model provided by Israel, where, if I may be allowed, it is the only country in the Middle East where Arabs can freely elect their own representatives to parliament. And I think we should never forget that we have many values we share with Israel, the value of liberal democracy, and Israel is part of our own identity because the state, which is the expression of the great Jewish history, and the Jewish state is a founding part of our identity as Europeans and as Italians. The Judaic tradition and the Christian tradition and the great liberal tradition are the constituent elements in our European civilization. So I believe Israel is a part of us, and we're a part of Israel, if I may say. Having made that necessary introduction, there are two brief comments I would like to make. A few weeks ago, I was in Israel. It was also a journey for tourism, but also went to Alderot to see the bus stops, next to which, one of which there is a bunker, because the friendly inhabitants of Gaza have the habit of everyday launches of missiles to cheer up the inhabitants. I'll speed up. And so this is something which is happening every day. I also went to Bedwell, which is a place which is part of the West Bank, or Samaria to be precise. And it's one of the so-called settlements. So it's one of those areas which, if we were to return to the 67 borders, would be part of the Arab state. From there, one can see the sea. You can see the skyscrapers in Tel Aviv. You can see the Ben Gurion airport. On a clear day, you can also see Ashkelon and Ashdod. What am I trying to say with this? That if we were to return to the 67 borders, Israel would just be a narrow strip of land which would, and where you could see the sea all over. It's basically the distance between here and Ostia, or here and Fiumicino. So those who speak of two peoples and two states, and we believed in that formula for many years, must realize that this is the situation we face, and two peoples and two states can never be achieved, at least until Israel can be reasonably sure that from this narrow, that people don't want to eject the Israelis from this narrow strip of land. Another consideration is not linked to the Arab-Israeli conflict. I went to Mossad on the 25th anniversary of the foundation of Italy, which also the anniversary of the liberation of Italy. So here too our histories intertwine. On the basis of what I've read and what I've heard, I thought I would find a country which was torn in two because of events over the last few years, but particularly the recent disagreement over the reform of justice. You, Mr. President, have also served as Minister of Justice, so you also have experience with this. But I had a different experience. I saw demonstrations. There was definitely a major debate underway, but it was not a country torn in two. It is a country which has maintained its deep identity, a country which continues to function, and a country which has not lost its conscience and its pride in itself. I'd like to have your opinion on that. Quarta Pelle. Many thanks, President. Welcome to Speaker Ohana. I think that your personal and political biography is an example of how complex Israel is and how many things it contains, and often the picture we have of it in Italy is a two-dimensional and stereotypical one. I also greatly appreciate your will to discuss matters. I think friends discuss matters and can also express different points of view because we are friends. And I think it was very important that you started from the issue of security in your address to us. Anyone who is a friend of Israel has central to our attention the issue of security in Israel. This has to be recognized every time we meet. On this, however, I would like to put some questions to you to understand better. We've all been following, those of us who've been to Israel more closely and those who've not from a greater distance, we've all been following the debate underway in Israel on the reform of justice, of the justice system. In many places, the issue of the reform of the justice system has been debated. I'm a member of a social democratic party, which is a party which is linked to the Labour country. We have links with Yair Lapid and Meretz, and yes, we realize that the issue of the reform of justice runs the risk of splitting the country, and therefore opening up vulnerability to the enemies of Israel, because a divided Israel is more vulnerable. But we're also worried about what we understand about the reform of the justice system, because it runs the risk of damaging the basic characteristic for which we defend Israel, democracy and the rule of law. It runs the risk, this reform, of damaging the democratic and system of the law of order. So I'd like to know how this links with what you said about security, not only because the reform of justice was not only opposed by politicians. All political parties we've spoken to said they could only bring not more than 10,000 people onto the streets. And we saw many, many more, lots of whom are part of the security structures. So we'd like to understand this better. The second issue refers to the recent conversations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. You said that the security of Israel has changed also because there's a better relationship with certain Sunni countries in the region. In your opinion, the relationship which is being established between Saudi Arabia and Iran one of the channels through which one can begin to talk with Iran, or is there the risk of this contaminating Saudi Arabia and leading them to a more hostile attitude towards Israel? Another question, the question of two two peoples, two states. If you go beyond the two-state, two-people solution, as I think you were suggesting, I think there has to be greater commitment towards coexistence and therefore a greater respect of everybody's rights. And I think this is a further challenge. Thank you. Ms. Quartapelle, we're now taking up the chair of our discussion. So I'd like to ask the speaker to answer the questions which have been put to him.
No, there is no agreement. There is no agreement, I'm sorry. Non c'è accordo. Non c'è accordo, mancano ancora due interventi.
No, sorry, there are still two people who wish to speak. So we'll ask the...
Farò del mio meglio per rispondere in fretta dopo.
L'onorevole...
So, colleague Boldrini. Yes, good afternoon to the President and good afternoon to Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to meet you. With regard to your historical reconstruction, I must say that I disagree with the interpretation you've given of the events. And I believe that there was a time where Israel was in the front line for dialogue and peace with the Oslo Accords, but Prime Minister Rabin paid with his life and was killed by a right-wing extremist for having committed himself to a dialogue with the Palestinians. From that time on, this dialogue was frozen. The year after, Netanyahu became prime minister, and I believe that a dialogue with the Palestinians was no longer a priority. And I'm also saying this in light of my recent visit to Israel and to the West Bank, which I believe to be Palestine. Amasafriyat, the Sheikh Jarrah districts of Jerusalem, where Asfayata, I saw a situation of authentic segregation of the Palestinian families in their own land. If we still believe in two peoples, two states, this should be the territory of Palestine. International legality, I believe, has some weight. If there are dozens of resolutions of the United Nations which speak of violation of international law and ask for an end to be put to settlements which for international law are illegal, we must comply with these resolutions because rules apply to all. We believe it to be unacceptable for Russia to militarily occupy another state. Here we're speaking of a territory which has never become a state, even though in 1947 the UN resolution spoke of two states, one Israeli and one Palestinian. Occupying another territory is illegal from an international law standpoint. But I wish to put to you a question alongside asking you what you think of the two peoples, two states solution, which is the solution which the Meloni government also support, and she said that in her recent meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I'd like to remind you, Mr. Speaker, today is the Day of Europe. It is a celebration of Europe today, and we hold this community very dear. For more than 7 years, Europe has guaranteed peace, stability and prosperity to its members. The European Union is the bulwark of human rights and of the protection of minorities, the rights of women and of the LGBTQ plus community. And I would like to understand what the point is to send to the celebration of the European Union, why the Netanyahu government decided to send to the celebrations a minister, Ben Gvir, a person who is well known for his positions which go against the principles of the European Union, extremist, homophobic, a person who's been sentenced 8 times, convicted 8 times for having instigated racism. So I wish to ask you, why was this choice made? Why was this provocative action decided, sending a minister who is obviously against the founding principles of the European Union in a day when the European Union is being celebrated? Thank you. A colleague Frattoianni. Many thanks. Mr. Speaker, this is a hearing. We've heard your point of view. I won't comment on it. What I would like to do is simply put a question to you, as is the custom in hearings. The question I'd like to put to you is the following. I'd like to ask whether your government and you, Israel, truly believe you can contribute to strengthen your security, something which nobody should oppose, by continuing with a policy which over the decades behind us and in recent days has been characterized by systematic violation of international law. My colleague Boldrini was pointing this out, systematic violation of international law and the basic human rights of an entire people, the Palestinian people. Decisions which over the years have significantly contributed to weakening the secular dimension of a large part of the Palestinian leadership, and which has promoted the growth and spread of organizations of a different nature, such as the ones you mentioned, first and foremost Hamas, favoring therefore the establishment and the growth of these organizations in the Arab world. If decisions such as the nighttime the attack in the Gaza Strip, or what was done near the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the nighttime, and the attack in Gaza, 4 women, 4 children were killed, something which is also criticized by the representative of the United Nations. I believe that these decisions, these actions, as Ms. Boldrini pointed out, also involve the systematic expansion of settlements in the West Bank. And whether these really contribute to greater security for Israel, I don't think so. And if having abandoned the prospect of 2 people, 2 state system, such solution is a mistake, not only for the well-being of the Palestinian people, but also for the security of Israel itself. I believe that also in terms of effectiveness, I believe that this will not be good for attaining full security for Israel in its area. Mr. Rosato, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker Ohana, for being with us and for talking to us. I also briefly want to thank you for your visit and for the friendship between our countries, which is clear and which is not subject to discussion independently of our political positions. Governments of various countries, various kinds come and go in our countries, but our friendship remains strong. I also wish to thank you and your government for the work of your ambassador here, who's always very scrupulous and facilitates friendship between our two countries and our institutions. Just 2 points I would like to refer to. Other colleagues have raised other issues. The first one is the issue of the general security of Israel, which certainly is linked to the new equilibria which are being established following the Russian-Ukraine conflict. I think it's our interest in a situation where there are two blocs in opposition and where your historical foes, such as Iran, in a situation like this, it is necessary to be determined to defend international law. That can only be done with a major, strong criticism of Russia and with the most extensive support possible for Ukraine and its people, which obviously must be a political support, but also military and economic support for that country. I believe that we all need to make an effort in this direction, and the role of Israel is also particularly important there. The second matter also refers to the security of that important part of the Mediterranean where the Russian presence is being strengthened, also from a military perspective, making use of the conflict in Syria, and I think this is a concern for all Western countries, in particular the neighbors of Syria. The situation in Syria is a situation which does not show a positive solution on the horizon. I would like to know, Mr. Speaker, based on your knowledge and experience, what you think could be a way out for that country, which is a key country and which contains a very high coefficient of danger for the stability of the Middle East. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Borghi. Thank you. Madam Chair, I wish to thank the Speaker for this visit, which I hope we can repay soon. First of all, I'd like to recall that as far as my party is concerned, but I also believe the majority of the Parliament currently, what occurred during the boycotting of the European Union for the presence of Minister Ben-Gvir was very unpleasant and to be regretted. I believe sincerely that nobody in the European Union has a monopoly on deciding what European values are and which people embody them in international governments. We believe that Israel obviously has the right to decide on all its ministers. This is a maneuver which we've seen in our country too, where political opponents are branded as far-right extremists, which avoids considering the role those people are playing at that time. Serving the state as a minister is a great honor. Serving the state as a Speaker of Parliament is a great honor. And in that role, all people represent the state they're serving. So honestly, I think it was a big mistake on the part of the European Union. Now, with regard to my area of expertise, the economy, rather than putting a question, I would like to express the hope that what is beginning to be done by our two countries, namely a closer cooperation in the area of energy, may be the beginning of something more, because so far Italy has exported more to Israel than Israel exports towards Italy. So you're good customers for us from an economic standpoint. I believe that normally relations are good between countries when imports and exports are balanced. If through the importation of natural gas, in which areas is beginning to become a major international player and increase our trade relations between us, with us increasing exports of our goods and furniture to your country and you managing to ensure a good trade in energy. Personally, I would be much happier to buy from Israel than from other countries which are less reliable, let's say, in terms of geopolitical security. So I believe that that would be something very useful for our two countries and for our future relations. Thank you. I still have two people asking for the speak. Lopez and Fassino, I'd like to ask them to restrict themselves 2 minutes, because then the speaker will need to leave us. Thank you, Madam President. And a sign of respect for our guest who's showing he's polite in staying with us. And I'd like to express simply the solidarity of our group with regard to the terrorist attacks Israel is facing, and rejecting terrorism is something we all have to be involved in, and we all have to work as a team as democratic states, also because the distances between countries are shorter and shorter. There's so many interrelations. And having said this, the Italian state wishes to deepen our relations in the fields of scientific research and economic research, also research in desalination of seawater is something which is of great importance too. So we think 360-degree scope of cooperation in the most democratic state in the Middle Eastern area. Thank you, Mr. Fassino, who's Deputy President of the Defense Committee. Since we have very little time, I simply wish to thank the Speaker for his presence with us. One question which goes back to something which our colleague Quartapelle referred to, the prospects of stability and security of the region are based on the solution of the Israelo-Palestinian relation. Two possibilities. One is to work to achieve the two peoples, two-state solution based on what was established in the Oslo and the Washington agreements, and on which there have been attempts to move ahead without any success over the last few decades. And the other is to say that this solution is no longer feasible, and this would mean a single larger Israeli state, which would also include the West Bank, which is a solution which some Palestinians are beginning to pay attention to. Don't you believe that this solution would carry with it the risk of an ongoing continuous conflict, namely that the aspiration to independence of a Palestinian state would not be solved by a greater Israeli state, including West Bank, and that would be a continuing risk factor and a factor of insecurity for Israel. Also, from view of population dynamics, we know that population dynamics can change and maybe go against from the Jewish population, proportion of the Jewish population in Israel. So asking you whether it's not more realistic to continue working for the two-state, two-people solution. Thank you. With this, I'd like to give the floor to Speaker Ohana for his answers, and thank him for the time.
Madam President, currently, and thank you to all the honorable members who asked the questions. normally what I would do is have a question and answer, question and answer. This time we did it quite differently, so I hope I gathered all the major points of issues, but please let me know how much time do I have to answer the questions.
Quello che lei ritiene.
What you, as much as you believe, up to a quarter of an hour, I think, but it depends on your business.
I need 15 hours if I can get it.
È l'occasione
Okay,
per
so,
rinvitarla.
I will do my best to answer at least those two major issues. One came from a few members about the judicial reform and what does it mean and the political struggle within Israel. And then coming back again to the conflict and the solutions or ideas we have to resolve that. So, regarding the judicial reform, which is something I have been talking about for roughly 20 years, and since I was a student of law, later becoming a lawyer. What we have now in Israel is a, how shall I say delicately, challenged democracy. Because starting 1977, the judiciary took more and more powers, and today the public has very little say as to the public sphere. How did it happen? In 1977, for the first time, was elected a prime minister that was not a part of the ruling hegemony of the Labour Party that was ruling up until that point. That was the late Menachem Begin. Now, today, our friends, our colleagues from the left, miss Menachem Begin very much. They always do when our leaders are dead or irrelevant. But back then, when he was elected, they were terrified. They were horrified. They considered Begin, and this is how they referred to him, as a fascist, as a terrorist, someone that will bring destruction upon the state of Israel. One of the leaders of the Labourers back then said, if this is the people's decision, we should change the people, replace the people. And they had to find a way to continue to rule without being elected, because the people don't elect them. And they did it through the judiciary. How so? Only 2 years after the political upset of 1977, a young Supreme Court judge wrote these very, very words. The letter of the law in a verdict, in a decision by the court. The letter of the law is not a fortress that has to be conquered by dictionaries, but rather a package to a living idea that changes with life and circumstances. In day-to-day language, it means, who the H are you? You, the legislator, you, the people that were elected by the public, you don't get to decide what is the meaning of the law. Yes, you write the laws, but we don't care what's written there. We care about the meaning that we think they should have. That young named judge was Aharon Barak. Later he became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and implemented what he said 20 years ago by declaring that Israel has a constitution. Now, as you may know, we don't have a constitution. The state of Israel was established in 1948. That could have been a good time to bring a constitution, but they couldn't reach wide consensus. They couldn't reach agreements. So they passed the authority to form a constitution to the second Knesset. That was called the Harari decision. And the second Knesset also tried to bring a constitution, but they also could not reach an agreement. So in the 90s, in one of the most controversial decisions by the Supreme Court, when Aharon Barak already became the Chief Justice, he said in a, as I said, very significant decision that is called Mizrahi Bank, the Mizrahi Bank, we have a constitution, we have the basic laws which gives the Supreme Court the authority to invalidate laws taken by the Knesset if we believe, we the judges believe, they are unconstitutional. They are not in one line with the basic laws. Now, let me tell you how far from truth it is. When you take a look at the protocols of the Knesset, the members of the Knesset had no idea that they are bringing a constitution. They had no idea that they are giving the authority to the Supreme Court to invalidate Knesset laws. And let me tell you, and please let me tell you, how so? Because had it been something near a constitution, had it been something that the Knesset members would perceive as giving the Supreme Court authority to invalidate Knesset laws, I think it wouldn't have happened in a transitional government, meaning a government that still was not elected, and it was probably not voted by 31 Knesset members. Now we had 32 members of the Knesset voted for that basic law, and 21 was opposing. So if you combine those who voted for it and those who voted against it together, they still don't constitute a majority of the Israeli parliament. But for Aaron Barak, it was enough to claim that there is a constitution, there is an authority to the Supreme Court to invalidate Knesset laws that was accepted in all readings as acceptable, and so he did. Now, this itself is very controversial, but let me tell you what else. Now the Supreme Court claims they have the authority to invalidate basic laws. They have given a decision. Still, they didn't invalidate a basic law, but they said they have the authority to invalidate basic laws. Now, if you have authority to invalidate laws, if they contradict the basic law, what gives you the authority to invalidate a basic law, which is the equivalent of a constitution, right? But this is the struggle that we are facing, and if I would have to summarize the whole issue of judicial reform to 3 words, it would be, who's the sovereign? Who gets to take the decisions? Is it the public through their representatives, or is it the unelected officials of the court? Now, it is a struggle that you can find in many democracies. In many democracies, the issue of balancing the powers between the 3 branches of power, checks and balances, as Montesquieu brought to the world, is a very significant issue. Now, in Israel, the hottest issue that we had on the table from this judicial reform is how to appoint judges. Let me tell you a few words, because this was the controversial issue, how to appoint judges. We have a system so successful and so brilliant that the numbers of countries adopting it is 0. Throughout the years, it brought us a judiciary that is not, to say the least, diverse, not pluralistic, does not reflect the beautiful mosaic of Israeli society. Why? Because the system is, we have a committee of 9 members, 3 of which are Supreme Court judges, 2 members of the bar, which traditionally, almost without exception, we had 1 exception, goes together, so that is already a majority, 5 out of 9. And then 4 politicians, 2 members of the cabinet ministers, 1 member of Knesset from the coalition, and 1 from the opposition. Now, what was the change that we tried to bring to the table? We wanted to have more of the public elected figures within that committee. you could be for it, you could be against it, but could you seriously think that we did it because we wanted a more pluralistic system, a more diverse system, a system that reflects the Israeli society? Can you seriously claim that that is the end of democracy? That bringing more people elected by the public to the committee that appoint judges, meaning a dictatorship? I cannot accept that. Of course, I would agree that it was not properly mediated to the public. That is beyond dispute, because we saw many, by the way, we saw many demonstrations against the judicial reform. We saw many for the judicial reform. And what one of the honorable members mentioned, and that is something to admire, I think, that throughout all of these weeks of very, very serious demonstrations, we faced almost zero violence. So it's a sign of a healthy democracy that debates. This is what we do. This is what we do currently, trying to reach wide consensus agreements about the judicial reform that we could bring. But I assure you, and I assure you as someone who knows the system very well, both as Minister of Justice, as someone who served as a lawyer, who studied the law, that once the major part of the judicial reform would go through, not only shall Israel remain a democracy, it will be much more democratic than it is today, because we would have more weight to the public's will, to the public electing their representatives to give their policies. Now, why is it that I want that the last word would belong to the public through their representatives? Not because the members of Knesset are more educated than the judges, not because the average member of Knesset is smarter than the judges, but for one reason: because the members of the Knesset, and they alone, shall report to the people and ask for their trust, and either gain their trust or lose it, as happened just a few months ago. This is why I believe it is much more democratic that more decisions will be taken by the people elected by the public, in which the public can replace when they want and could give trust or lose trust, and not the elected judges. This is the nature of the debate. Of course, we are concerned very much about this debate, and we are doing our best efforts to explain to the public what we are trying to do and why it will not be a dictatorship and why it shall remain and be even more democratic. And we are trying to reach agreements. This is where we are at this point. Now, the second issue was, again, regarding the conflict. And some of the honorable members said that, in their opinion, the policy of this government does not contribute to peace. But, as you all know, we are in power, but we haven't always been in power. We had governments that took a different path and took tremendous steps towards the Palestinians. Former President Clinton said that during his tenure as president, they offered the Palestinians 100% of the Gaza Strip, 97% of Judea and Samaria, 97% of Judea and Samaria. We know we had two prime ministers, the two Ehuds, that were suggesting to divide Jerusalem, which, let me tell you, is very, very, very far from the Israeli consensus. And I have to ask, why is it still that they didn't shake their hands? Why is it still that they wouldn't accept those very, very generous offers? Now, I have my idea. If you accept or not, it is up to you. My belief, as I said, I do not think the matter is Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, or even Jerusalem. I think they are not willing to accept, they are still not willing, maybe in the future it will be different, still not willing to accept the idea of a Jewish state in any borders, which is why they still say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. This is the end game. Not for all of them, I accept. Maybe not even for the majority, I can accept. But yes, for the influential majority, unfortunately. Now, you mentioned some of the issues that I think could contribute to have peace in the future. In our 75 years of existence, we did our best to succeed to be pretty good, if I may say so myself, in high technologies, sciences, startups. We used to have, when I was growing up as a teenager, we used to have a very serious water problem in Israel. I mean, we all remember the slogan, never lose a drop. Every drop counts. This is what we grew up on. Years later, I can say we have solved Israel's problems. And it is not because we found a water reservoir for somewhere, but because of sciences and technologies. I think we are the #1 country in the world to desalinate water. Now we have even technologies to make water out of air, fresh air. This is something we are working very hard to give to the world. We are working hard on it in Africa, in India, some other Asian countries, and I think it is a great opportunity, and I told so to many of my colleagues here, to cooperate with Italy, because I understand that you are facing a similar problem with water. So this is something we can work on. We can focus on so many good things and not focus only on this conflict, and I will soon say why. Technologies, high-tech, bringing so much good to the world and to the populations of our country. Now, I was fortunate enough to be a minister in the government that signed the Abraham Accords. For years, we hear you will never have normalization with Arab countries. You will never have peace agreements with Arab countries, except Egypt and Jordan, which we have already achieved, unless you resolve the Palestinian issue. And as I just told you, many governments, many Israeli governments have been trying to do so, unsuccessfully, unfortunately. But what we have proven in the Abraham Accords is that, yes, we can. Yes, we can have peace with the Arab world, not with one, not with two, but with 4 Arab countries, 2 of which I was fortunate enough to visit with my family. Both my parents, by the way, were born and raised in Morocco, so that was one of the countries that I got to visit and see the houses that they left 70 years ago. That was very moving for me, and I have to tell you that during my tenure as minister, the Arab ministers of the countries were very close to me, and I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud to have them on my speed dial list here in my phone. And I think our goal, our mission, is to expand the Abraham Accords, hopefully with the help of our friends and our good friends in Italy too, both in quantity and quality. Meaning, first, having more countries joining the Abraham Accords, and one honorable member, or maybe even 2, mentioned Saudi Arabia. It's not a secret that we desire to have Saudi Arabia as one of those countries, probably a very significant, very powerful, very meaningful country, but also quality, meaning those who are already within the Abraham Accords, we want to deepen and strengthen the relations with them. And this is what we do. We believe that it will contribute to the possibility of having peace with our close neighbors, with the Palestinians in the future. We believe that stigmatic ideas have failed before, and this is an innovative idea. This is something new. I think it can only achieve better for the world, better for the Arab countries, better for all people, because I think we all cherish peace. This is undisputable. This we have a total agreement on. And if we want to work on it, we should focus on the good things. We have so much of it, so much of it. Thank you. Thank you so much for this meeting, and thank you for being patient with me.
Grazie mille, Presidente.
Many thanks, Mr. Speaker. And I think that this meeting demonstrates that we have many things still to discuss. I think we would all want to continue our discussion. And so we really hope to meet you soon in Israel or again here in Rome.
Thank you so much.